Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you here today on our new panels about Europe discussion. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome today Monsieur Alain Lamassoure. He's the chairman of the Committee of Budget for the European Union. And without further ado, I would like to give word to my colleague, Mr. Plenković, who, as you know, is a member of the Croatian Parliament and the observer in the European Parliament. So, Mr. Plenković will have the honor of introducing our today's guest of honor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njavro, Mr. Dean, Đuro Njavro, Cher President, Mr. Letica, our moderator and our leading Croatian intellectuals, ladies and gentlemen, students, former ministers, ambassadors. It is my great pleasure to be here today at the Zagreb School of Economy and Management and have the honor to present to you one of the leading French and European politicians, Mr. Alain Lamassoure, with whom I have had the privilege to work in the course of the last 8 to 9 months as one of the 12 observers from the Croatian Parliament in the European Parliament. I have seen him work hard on the key European dossiers as a chairman of the Committee of Budgets. I have seen him try to find solutions on critical European issues, especially in the debate on the amending of the budget of 2012 and the adoption of the budget of 2013, and most of all within the debates on the key European issue, and that is the multi-annual financial framework. Mr. Lamassoure has been a French politician, member of the Union pour un mouvement populaire, UMP, which is a party, member of the European People's Party, the same political family that my party, Croatian Democratic Union, belongs to. And he has, in his career, taken various important duties in French administration, but also at the European level. To mention only a few, after having graduated at the Paris Institute of Political Studies and ENA, École Nationale d'Administration, which is basically a cradle of the best educated French administrators and officials, but also a basis for a future political life of many of the members of ENA. He has worked in a number of French ministries as an advisor in the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, in the Finance Ministry, in the Ministry of Infrastructure. He has also worked in the office of the President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing between 1978 and 1981. He has continued to cooperate with different French presidents under their mandates, President Mitterrand, President Chirac, and also finally, of course, President Sarkozy. He has been a member of the French National Assembly in few occasions, and also four-time elected member of the European Parliament. He was also the minister responsible for European affairs in the French government in the 90s, as well as the minister responsible for budget. That means that his career has always taken him between Brussels and Paris, has always enabled him to tackle the key European dossiers from the point of view of a founding member state, a state that thinks about Europe, and a state who has given founding fathers of what we have today as the European Union. Having worked in our embassy in Paris for 5 years, I have learned how important this French, I would say Cartesian way of thinking is important for today's European construction. He was also a member of the European Convention, the biggest novelty in the period of drafting and changing basic European treaties between 2002 and 2005. So we can say that he's also an expert on constitutional affairs, and he has worked in that committee in the previous mandate of the European Parliament. To conclude my remarks on President Lamassoure, I will just come back to a year which is important very much for Croatia, and that is the year of 1991. At the time, as a member of the French National Assembly, it was autumn, it was only a few weeks after the Yugoslav planes bombarded the palace at the time of the president, today it's a government building. Mr. Lamassoure came to Croatia as an opposition politician to extend his support for the independence of Croatia, and he met and was received at the time by President Tudjman. That shows the track record of support for Croatia by Mr. Lamassoure, and I think it is important to appreciate this particular point of history today when we are on the verge of membership just 4 months before accession. I thank you very much for accepting the invitation to visit Croatia. Today, Mr. Lamassoure was received by the President of Parliament, Mr. Leko, President of the Croatian Democratic Union, Mr. Karamarko. We had a very important and very fruitful meeting with the members of 4 committees in the Croatian Parliament, and tomorrow he will also see the Vice President of the Government and the Minister of Finance. I'm sure you will all learn a lot about his vision of what is the state of the European Union on the eve of the accession of Croatia to this organization. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dean, dear Andrei, Mr. and Mrs. Ambassadors, parliamentarians, dear friends, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to address such an audience. I am very impressed, and at the same time it's a bit of a frustration because I address you neither in Croatian nor in French, but in my poor English language. So I'm sorry for the poor quality of my English. I will try to make myself understood and to open by some introductory remarks our exchange of views on the EU, the state of play, the situation of the European Union, on the eve of Croatia's accession. And I'm particularly moved to be today in Zagreb, the invitation of my friend Andrei, a few months or weeks before Croatia's accession. And Croatia joins us at a particularly critical time. But before speaking of the current times, let me recall what we tried to achieve in launching half a century ago the European process. In the French political system, I am an old political animal. I am the only French politician who decided a few years ago to abandon a French national political career to dedicate himself completely to European politics, when I realized that nowadays, from now on, the main political decisions for the future of France are no longer taken in Paris by the French rulers, but taken in Brussels by the French rulers, but among other ones, in the framework of the European Union. In France, as you know, we have what we call a presidential political system. France is led by the elected French President of the Republic, but the French President of the Republic doesn't rule France alone from Paris anymore, but with his colleagues in Brussels. And of course, if we want our national interests defended and our national vision of Europe, of what the European family is, of what the European future should be, we must be present, active, as efficient as possible in Brussels. And when I say we, it is we the French, we the Croats, we the Germans, the Spaniards, etc. Maybe a first element of precision. What Europe is not. The difficulty when we deal with Europe, when we speak about Europe, is to make understood what Europe is and what Europe is not. What is the European Union? And usually, for the academics and for the political debate, we tend to compare Europe with a kind of federation, of confederation, with references of the past. And what is interesting, what is amusing, what is important about the European Union is that Europe, the European Union, is an unprecedented political entity, which of course has some features comparable with federations or existing political entities, communities, bodies, but which is very different. Europe is and will be very different from what was in the 19th century the K und K. It's not an empire bringing together various nationalities. It's of course very different from what was the Federation of Yugoslavia. Europe is a democratic construction, preserving the sovereignty of peoples and the human rights. And what is very interesting is that, contrary to what everybody, every of us, believed even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, Europe is a way to combine both objectives which initially seemed perfectly, utterly contradictory to each other. On one side, to unite different peoples, to make them able to live together peacefully and to take action with one single move on the world stage. First objective. Second objective, to maintain national sovereignties. And a few years ago, it seemed completely contradictory. And in all our countries, members of the European Union, the debate about Europe opposed, pitched, the federalists, I was one of them, the ultimate objective of whom was the United States of Europe, compared with the United States of America, against the sovereignists or the Eurosceptics, who wanted, above all, maintain, preserve, retain national sovereignty against Brussels, the Eurocrats anonymous Eurocrats of Brussels. We were wrong from both sides. We need both. We need more unity, but maintaining sovereignties. Why? Because Europe is composed of 27 and early, soon, 28 member states, each of which very keen on retaining their sovereignty. The ones because They are all nations and all nation states, independent states for a long time. It's a case for France, for Britain, for instance, or Austria, or more recently Germany. It's the case for Spain, for Portugal, etc. And other ones, because they are young independent states, which is the case for Croatia, for Slovenia, for the Baltic states, for the Czechs and the Slovaks. So, you don't want to abandon your recent independence in favor of a new kind of federation. You want to retain Croatian sovereignty, independence, freedom, language, culture, identity. And likewise, in France, we want to retain our identity, sovereignty, independence, freedom, and language and culture. And, however, while maintaining this sovereignty, this national identity and margin for maneuver, we must take into account the fact that due to the success of what we call the European construction, we are now at peace. We have been at peace on the western part of the continent for the last 70 years. More recently for the eastern part of the continent and Central Europe. But for the last 70 years. And what was a dream, a utopia for the philosophers of the 18th century, perpetual peace, we have achieved it among ourselves. It's a miracle. It's a political miracle. There is no precedent in history and no equivalent elsewhere in the world. Realize, when asked in a Gallup poll, what is the people closest to the French people? 2 French out of 3 answer, of course, the German people. And conversely, 2 Germans out of 3 respond, of course, the French people. And it looks obvious for the younger generation as yours, dear students. It's amazing, it's extraordinary. If I take my grandmother, and what I'm going to say, every French, at 1 or 2 generations of difference, could say the same. My grandmother, her father had fought against the Germans in 1870. Her husband had fought the Germans in the First World War. We will commemorate 100 years next year. Her son and sons-in-law, including my father, fought the Germans in the Second World War. If I had told my grandmother, someday the Germans will be considered by the French people as their closest friends, she would have commented, young boy, you are crazy, go to play. We have done it. What does that mean? That means 2 things. For our neighborhood, for the rest of the world, it's an extraordinary message of hope. If what has been possible between the French and the Germans, who have been arch enemies for centuries, to be reconciled that way, that means that sometime, maybe sometime soon, between the Jews and the Muslims, when asked the same question, the Israeli would answer, of of course, the Palestinians. And conversely, and in this part of the European continent, what does mean this message of hope? Sometime, hopefully sometime soon, one asks the same question. Well, the answer will be, we are surrounded by friends. All the peoples around us are friends. Don't ask me who is the best one. They all are. They are all our best friends. It's the European miracle. But we must realize the consequence of this miracle is that the most difficult problems we have to deal with today are not the problems created by our failures. Of course, we have made a lot of mistakes, we have had a lot of failures, the economic crisis is one of them. Of course, there will be questions about the economic crisis. I will say a word on that. But the most difficult issues are the ones created by our success. And our success means that for now decades we have lived in peace, and we have to manage the problems of peaceful, democratic countries at peace with all their neighbors, and living with their neighbors a perpetual peace. And because we are at peace, we exchange everything. We exchange goods, services, financial needs. We travel, we visit each other. And now it's with or without the so-called Schengen Agreement, we are obliged to leave people travel around in the European area, in the European space. And we realize that it creates unexpected problems, new problems we have to tackle. So what we have achieved with the European construction is, first, this miracle of the reconciliation among our peoples. Second, the contagion of democracy and the possibility of new democracies to join the European community and then the European Union enable these countries to strengthen their new democracy, to confirm they belong to democracies, and to take part to this European community. At the same time, we have exported, as it were, to our new members this kind of common features of what we can call a common social market economy model. Our national models are still different, but we tend to come closer to one common model of social market economy. And what we have achieved also, and it has been abundantly demonstrated by the recent crisis, is the merging of our economy up to the merging of our national currencies, which is now realized by 17 countries, and which in a few years will be the case for almost all the rest of the member states of the European Union, including, hopefully, Croatia, a part, probably for some time, for the United Kingdom. And what the crisis has demonstrated is that we are now, after half a century of what we call the European construction, and the big enlargement to Central and Eastern Europe in 2004-2007, enlargement which will be completed with Croatia next July. We have attained a level of community of interests which is far higher than the most optimistic of us reckoned before the crisis. A few examples. When the financial crisis broke up in September or October 2008 with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. It was contagious to the United Kingdom. A few weeks later, we had to close down a small regional airport in my area of southwest of France. Strange. Because in this part of France live now several thousands of British citizens who were ruined by the situation of the City of London and the fall of the sterling pound as compared with the euro. Other consequence, after the financial crisis, as a consequence of this crisis, we experienced a recession all over Europe, with the risk of our car makers going bankrupt. To prevent bankruptcy of our car makers, the French and the German governments decided to give financial grants to all those who would buy new cars, saving more CO2 than the old ones, to encourage the purchase of new cars and to sustain the car makers. But the main beneficiary of the grants paid by the German taxpayers were not the German car makers, but was the Romanian subsidiary of the French car maker Renault, Dacia, who builds a small car, very ecology, and so the German taxpayers paid salaries in Romania and profits in France. Another example, when after the accident, the nuclear accident of Fukushima in Japan, suddenly the German Chancellor decided to close down 7 nuclear reactors in Germany, there was an immediate consequence all over the European Union on the energy market, on the price of energy, on indirectly on the independence of the European Union on energy, etc. And last example, when we witnessed the Arab Springs, there were immediate consequences economically, but also on the spontaneous migrations from Northern Africa to Italy, Greece, and Spain, and other member states. These consequences, of course, implying not only the border states of the EU, but the whole European Union. So, we have achieved a community of interests so close that we have reached the stage of a community of destiny, a common destiny it's done. Whether we like it or not, we are bound to live very closely with our neighbors with which we are now at peace, at perpetual peace. It is the positive lesson of the crisis. But at the same time, the crisis contains also less positive lessons, and particularly two of them. The first lesson of the economic crisis, which has started in 2008 and which is still, unfortunately, ongoing in many member states, not all of them, but many member states. The first of these negative lessons is that every member state has to do his homework. We realize that when we created the euro, when initially 12 countries, and now there are 17 of us, decided to merge their national currencies and replace them by one single currency, the euro, the immediate consequence was a fall in the interest rates of our sovereign debts. It was a surprise, because when you merge your currencies, of course, it is expected, it's normal, it's healthy, that you see an harmonization of short-term interest rates, the reference of which is the interest rates of the common single central bank. Okay. What was not expected, and neither by the politicians, nor by the economists, nor by the central bankers, nor by the journalists, by anybody, what was not expected was an harmonization also of interest rates of the sovereign debts of all the member states of the Eurozone, and harmonization downwards. Countries who, due to the fact that they were not well managed, had to pay more to borrow on the financial markets, on their national debts, suddenly enjoyed a fall, a decline, sharp decline in their interest rates. It was the case particularly for the Mediterranean countries, members of the European Union and of the Eurozone. And unfortunately, these countries, instead of being cautious and realizing that it was probably temporary and it should have been better to be more cautious, they benefited. They took advantage of this situation to invest, to spend at public level, to spend privately in the private sector, to overspend, to overdebt, so that these countries were weakened by their poor laxist management when the crisis appeared in 2008, and the crisis was a very bad blow against them. And they survived, and they could stay in the euro area only due to the help of their partners of the euro area. And so the first negative lesson to be drawn from the crisis is that the the fact to be member of the Union, and particularly of the Euro, incited some of the member states to be less cautious, less serious in the management of their own national policies. And now everybody has to do one's homework, and it's particularly painful for some of these member states. And the second lesson of the crisis is for the European Union itself. In face of this, what I call this community of destiny, this common destiny, we have not created a community of solidarity, which is clearly required. If we are condemned to the same destiny, condemned to live together and to act together, we must ensure that we have the right institutions, the right procedures, the financial means, the legal means to make this common life easier, more pleasant, and to be more efficient on the world stage. Due to the Lisbon Treaty, we have a lot of means, but we need to adjust and to complement the current institutions, procedures, and financial means. And particularly, we must to complete, to invent actually a model of solidarity for the European Union. We have tried to invent, under the pressure of the crisis, some important elements. When Greece was on the verge of complete failure and bankruptcy, then Ireland, then Portugal, then Spain, we created a kind of European Monetary Fund, whereby those countries having retained their creditworthiness on the financial markets borrow together, pool their borrowing capacities to lend to the countries in difficulty, which are no longer able to borrow directly on the financial markets. It's what we call the European Stability Mechanism. And we have complemented this fund by a special treaty, the budget treaty, whereby all those who have signed the treaty committed themselves to do their homework, to come back as soon as possible to the balance of their national budget. And we can summarize this first step or this first building block of a model of European solidarity by the motto one for all and all for one. One for all means every one of us, all those who signed the treaty, commit himself to endeavor so that he won't need the help of his partners never again. It's the homework. It's one for all. And conversely, we reciprocate all for one if in spite of all its efforts and endeavors, one country is in great difficulty, so all the others will come to the rescue. It's this combination or addition of the budget treaty and the, what I call the European Monetary Fund. It's one building block of a model of European solidarity. It is not enough. It is not enough. We need also a genuine European budget, the budget of the European family. And then we need a particular feature of the European construction, which is a strange and unhelpful unbalance between the legislative powers of the Union and its budgetary needs. When I ask the best experts in law in France, they reckon that from now on, about 70% of the new rules of law applying in France every year are now either directly decided in Brussels by the European Union in the framework of the European institutions according to EU procedures, or decided in Paris, but under the pressure or with the inspiration of EU legislation. So, the European Union is a legislative giant, but budgetary speaking, it's a dwarf. Because when a French citizen earns 100 euros, he pays 45 euros of taxes and mandatory contributions, out of which 44 are redistributed in France, and 1 euro, 1 single euro, 1 tiny euro is redistributed in Europe by the European budget. 70% of the legislation, 1% of GNI, meaning 2% of public spending in Europe. It's very different from a federal system. In Germany, in Austria, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, in all the federal organizations, about half public spending is decided at the level of the federation. It's an order of magnitude. It's only 1 or 2% in the European Union. And we cannot pursue European policies without a reasonable amount of money, without EU budget a small higher than that is current amount. This budget is ruled by specific provisions in the treaty, according to which there is an annual budget, as is the case in our member states or localities or our companies, of course. But this annual budget is enshrined in a multi-annual framework which is negotiated and decided upon every 7 years to ensure that once decided, The EU policies, which imply, at least those of EU policies implying public spending, can be financed not only for 1 or 2 years, but for middle term, for 7 years, which is a good management. But of course, that requires that every 7 years we hold a very tough negotiation, both among the member states, today 27, 28 member states, and the European Parliament. It's a matter of budget, so we need, it's democracy, a vote by the Parliament representing the citizens, and we need, it's the European Union with 28 sovereign states, we need unanimity of the representatives of the member states. And unanimity, particularly on budget matters, is very difficult to obtain, as you can imagine. And now we are in the middle of a very tough negotiation, probably the toughest ever negotiation on budget in the EU, because the European Council has found a unanimous agreement a month ago in Brussels on the next multi-annual financial framework, but unfortunately on the basis of a reduction of the EU budget for the next 7 years as compared with the previous 7 years, the previous period. And of course, on Parliament side, we share different views. And we are now in the process of negotiating with the member states to try to convince them that after this crisis, and while some member states are still at the bottom of the crisis, to come out of the crisis by the top. We need more Europe, a stronger Europe, more solidarity among member states in favor of the worst off of the member states and those who are most in difficulty, rather than to try to weaken Europe and the European Union. We hope to clinch the final deal on this very difficult negotiation by the end of this half year, of this semester, meaning on the eve of Croatia's entry into the EU. If it wasn't the case, we will be happy to have your support in this difficult negotiation. But that's why you are joining us at a critical time. It's the first reason why this time is critical. And there is another reason, and I will end by that. Next year will be held the general European elections all over Europe. I have been told today that in a few weeks you will elect your representative to the European Parliament, but it will be a ballot limited to Croatia to elect those who will represent you officially in the European Parliament as of the 1st of July 2013 until next year. Because next year, probably in June 2014, we will hold the European elections in the 28 member states. And for the first time, thanks to the latest European Treaty, the Lisbon Treaty, the President of the European Commission will be elected by the European citizens through the election of the European Parliament. It's a first. Like a Prime Minister, like the Croatian Prime Minister, or the British Prime Minister, or the German Chancellor, or the Spanish Prime Minister. It's a first. So far, the President of the Commission being the executive branch of the European institutions, has been appointed as a kind of international civil servant, high civil servant, as is appointed the Secretary General of the United Nations or the Director General of the International Monetary Fund, by a political agreement among the governments, the major governments. It has been the case, including for the current President of the Commission, Mr. José Manuel Barroso. It's over. Mr. Barroso's successor will be elected by all of you, by all of us, by 500 million citizens through the election of the European Parliament. It's very good news. It's very good news. And all European political families are now preparing their internal procedure to appoint their candidate to their position. So in 1 year, in February or March 2014, our political family, and myself, the Christian Democrats, what we call the European People's Party, the Socialist Party, the Liberal Party, the Green Party, and all the others, each of them will nominate their candidate. We will ask this candidate to tour all the 28 capitals to campaign. He or she will have to present our common agenda. So we'll have one single Christian Democrat, Socialist, Liberal or Green agenda for the whole of Europe. And the media will, of course, stage debates, broadcast live between the main candidates. All Europe will watch the debate, and all Europe will go to the ballot booth on the election day. The turnout will be probably far higher than it used to be on European elections in the previous occasions. And so, late in June 2014, Europe will have a political authority strong of the legitimacy given by the vote of 500 million European citizens. So now is a critical time. We are trying to come out together of a very serious crisis. We are inventing a new model of solidarity among the member states and negotiating the financial needs and their distribution among policies and member states we can mobilize for the next 7 years. And now, or very soon, will be the time to make Europe move forward for another decisive step forward towards the foundation of really, truly, genuinely European democracy, continent-wide. And it's a blessing for us that Croatia will be part of this extraordinary achievement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture, Monsieur Lamassoure, and for reminding us of what a great success European Union actually is, because in all this, if we look at the press these days, there's been so much negative text written about the European Union, so it's, I think, really important to remember that what a success it was, but also for outlining the challenges that lie ahead. So we will be opening the floor soon for the questions from the audience. And allow me please to start by asking one question, maybe related to Croatia. So I think we all agree that Croatians are generally very pro-European Union. However, there is a sentiment among some cynics that Croatia's expected accession to the European Union is something similar to coming to a party at 5 a.m. in the morning when everybody's already a bit tipsy and there's no more food and people are asleep. So in that context, I want to ask you, given your experience as a chairman of the budget committee, we all know that also membership comes at a cost. So do you think that Croatia will eventually, in the first few years, be a net receiver or a net donor of the EU funds? So from the financial perspective.
You do want my answer?
Yes.
Well, you won't be disappointed. My answer is I don't mind. Why? I try. I've been trying for the last 5 or 6 years. Europe is a long patience. Constructing Europe needs patience. I've been trying for the last 5, 6, 7 years to shift the current system whereby the common budget is financed by national contributions, to come back to the original system, which is still laid down in the treaty, but it's a point on which we breach, we violate the treaty, according to which the EU expenditure, EU budget, is financed by own resources, directly and entirely dedicated to EU spending, autonomy, financial autonomy. As long as the EU is financed by national contributions, you can imagine what's happening. Before the crisis, not one single budget minister wanted to raise his taxes or his debt to contribute to an increase in the European budget, and since the crisis, not one of them is able to do it, even if he or she wanted to do it. The result of this situation is that every budget minister, but also every head of government, works as you have just done, in comparing what is his national contribution to the EU budget and his financial returns, either for his state, or for his region or localities, or for his fellow countrymen, particularly the farmers. More than 1/3 of the EU budget is dedicated to the agriculture policy. And it's this system gradually freezes the EU budget and now is bound to diminish the EU budget year after year. For instance, if we take a country like Spain, when we had to negotiate this year's budget, the annual budget for the year 2030, it was last November, late November. The Spanish finance minister refused the appropriation, the required appropriations to fund the EU policies, which required a very small increase. I tried to convince him, why are you against? Your country is a net beneficiary. Your country receives from Brussels more money than you contribute to the EU budget. His answer was, yes, my country as a whole. But it is the Spanish national budget who pays to Brussels the Spanish national contribution, and the financial returns for Spain go to the regions of Catalonia, the Basque Country, Andalusia, etc. So, and I had to then to turn to the Catalans, Andalus, and Basques to convince them, to convince the national government that it was necessary for them to get the money from Brussels. So it's a vicious circle we have to come out of. And we, the Parliament, due to our insistence and consistency, we have obtained that for the negotiation of the next 7-year framework, the Commission has officially put forward 2 proposals of new resources, new sources of revenue for the European budget, which could be added to each other. It's not optional. It could be an addition. The first is the allocation to the EU budget of 1 point of VAT, something like that. Technically speaking, it's more complicated, but it amounts to that. And the second proposal would be the creation of financial transaction tax, the whole of which or part of which could be dedicated, earmarked for the EU budget. On this draft financial transaction tax, 11 member states have agreed to create this kind of tax among us. It will be done in the next few weeks or months before the end of this year. And what is to be negotiated, it is what part of the revenue of such a tax could be earmarked for the EU budget. But you see what is at stake politically. When I went to 1 year or 2 years ago to the German Bundestag, the German parliament, to make this point and to make them understand that it would be more transparent, more democratic, simpler for them as for us, the European Parliament, to come back to a situation of financial autonomy for the European institutions. I explained to them, so far, in Germany, which is, as you imagine, the first net contributor to the EU budget. So far, when you German members of parliament, of the Bundestag, you members of the European Parliament, when you address German audiences, when you have to explain what the European budget is, you have to tell your constituents, well, when it comes to the EU budget, you pay for it because you are Germans. And of course, the EU budget is not popular in Germany, because the EU budget is financed by national contributions. On the contrary, when you go to Portugal, if you are a Portuguese member of parliament, it's easier to explain that the EU budget, well, it's a good thing. You receive money from the EU budget because you are Portuguese. All the Portuguese are happy. own resources dedicated to the EU budget, that would mean that a German or a French or a Portuguese or tomorrow a Croatian parliamentarian or candidate will be able to tell his audiences, when it comes to the EU budget, you, because you are rich, you will pay for it. You, because you are poor, or because you have European projects, you are eligible to receive money for the EU budget, as it's the case with national budget or with local budget. That's why I am making all the efforts I can do to prevent such a question as yours to be put in future. You are right to put the question now, because it's a current system. But hopefully in a few years, this question will be over.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open the floor for questions now from the audience. Yes, please.
My name is Shahidul Islam. I am a student of the MBA program at Zagreb School of Economics and...
Maybe the micro, because...
Okay. I'm a student at the Zagreb School of Economics and Management. As we know, that in 2007, when Romania accessed European Union, it had been allocated an amount of about 20 billion euros in terms of cohesion and structural funds. But till September 2012, it only used 9.7% of the fund, and it was also less than 14%, including the national public contributions. The figures were not very different for Bulgaria also. So, Mr. Chairman, since you have been promoting inventing new ideas or modifying procedures, my question would be, have these cohesion and structural funds serving their purpose, or there is a need for modifying the granting procedures? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very important question, and your figures, unfortunately, are right. The crux of the matter lies in that, unfortunately, in both these countries, Romania and Bulgaria, the national administration is too weak and lacks competence to manage the European projects and European funds. 2 or 3 years ago, the then President of the Bulgarian Republic wrote a letter, and he made it public, to the President of the European Commission, in which he asked the Commission to send not only money, but also staff to manage the money and to devise and to implement the programs of the European Union. So we have a problem to recruit and train all the civil servants able to manage the projects. And it's a problem we have met previously in other so-called new member states, and this kind of problem may happen in Croatia. Why? Because in what we call the pre-adhesion, the pre-accession stage, which is the case for Croatia, there are usually, I don't know in Croatia, but there are usually dozens of civil servants coming from Brussels to help the local civil servants to manage the programs. And suddenly, overnight, when the accession is done, they come back to Brussels. And the national civil servants are alone to try to manage the programs. And it is difficult. It has been difficult in all new members, and particularly in those two you have quoted. So we try to accommodate these countries in sending some staff to help, also in agreeing that whereas for all the other member states they have to use up the funds allocated to them in 2 or 3 years. The difference between what we call the commitment and the payment, we can prolong by 1 year for these countries, but clearly we have got a problem in certain member states. In other member states, including in Western Europe, we face another kind of problems, which is that the local administration is competent, but not always honest. And we have to find ways of ensuring that money becoming more and more rare, we cannot afford wasting money through incompetent or dishonest hands. I won't quote anybody.
Yes, please.
Good evening, Mr. Lamassoure. We had the pleasure of meeting in my previous capacity in Sofia, if you remember this. I'm the head of the European Parliament's office there, and I had the very ironic role of being a European public servant, sent to Zagreb to open the office here as a Bulgarian national. Please help me. I will have the difficult task in the next 6 weeks to answer to a number of questions regarding the upcoming elections in the European Parliament. And one of the most important and difficult for me to answer is, what could the 12 Croatian MEPs do in this very short period they will be working until the next elections? They will have a mandate which is shorter than a year. What could be their role and how they can contribute or make a difference?
In one year. I'm not the best placed to answer this question, but my neighbor could. Well, we discussed this problem. Of course, it's a wide question. We discussed this problem with the president of the Croatian Sabah earlier this day, and with members of the chairs and members of important committees in the Croatian parliament. Originally, probably you remember, we all hoped that Croatia's accession could take place earlier, and that the duration of the mandate of the first Croatian members of the European Parliament would be longer. But it took more time than expected. And it is laid down in the accession treaty that if the accession took place more than six months before the next general European election, Croatia would have to elect their representative to the European Parliament. So if, and it's now highly likely, the accession takes place the 1st of July, Croatia will have to elect before the 1st of July their representatives to the European Parliament, and there will be a new election but, sorry, in all Europe in June. But, well, I guess that probably some of those who now are work in the European Parliament on behalf of Croatia as observers. It's your position as observers will be candidate and elected and will continue for 1 year. Their role today as observers, they can speak, of course, explain their position. They cannot vote. Can you be a reporter? No. No. Or shadow? Yes. Yes, but in committee you are talkative. Yeah. You are vocal. But not in plenary. They are observers. So, well, it's not an ideal situation, but in Europe, calendar, 1 year is very short. You will see. The micro is coming to you with a smile.
Hello, my name is Luka Kucher and I'm the 4th-year student. I have maybe not a so simple question, but a short one. So what is the image of Croats in Croatia from a standpoint of European? And I would want you if you can explain some weaknesses and strengths, and maybe some ways for us to improve this image also in the near and far future. Thank you.
The image of Croatia in Europe? Well, it's very good. It's very good. If you take my country, for instance, the ratification of the Croatian Treaty of Accession was put to the French Parliament, both chambers, the French National Assembly and the French Senate, 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago. And it's very interesting because France was one of the founder countries of the European Union, the European construction from the beginning. And among the French people, among the politicians, but among the French citizens, there is a sentiment that the Union has enlarged too much, too soon, too early. And we would, not myself, but the French as a whole, we would have preferred to wait a bit longer before opening our gates to our European neighbors. And that's the main reason why in 2005, 1 year after the big bang of the enlargement to the Central Europe, which took place in 2004, the French citizens rejected the draft European Constitution by referendum. It was a huge setback for us, for all Europe. So, in spite of this sentiment, when the Croatian problem, the Croatian application was put to the French Parliament, there was unanimous vote. Not one single French deputy or senator abstained or voted against. It's extraordinary. It was not the same with some neighboring countries. I won't want any, but it's the best answer to your question. Now, what we expect from Croatia? We expect from Croatia to help us understand what is going on, and unfortunately what is not going on. in the neighboring countries eastward and the rest of the Balkans. Because we all know that since the Dayton Agreement, this part of the continent is kind of frozen. Political situation is frozen, but below the ice, there are a lot of things which are brewing. And clearly, these countries are also entitled to become fully fledged democracies, to attain real nationhood, and if they so wish, to join our common European Union. But there are some conditions to be met. And, well, in Western Europe, we know almost nothing of these countries. Some of us happen to know something. We have some good specialists, but our public opinions don't know at all. And it will be very important for us to know better and to be more proactive and more efficient to help these countries to settle their national problems. And then Croatia can be very helpful. A last point. We appreciate in Europe, particularly in France, the interest of the Croatian authorities on all Mediterranean issues. It is very important. It is very important. Our future, and it's a matter of difference of opinion with, for instance, our Polish friends. Our Polish friends or our Baltic friends tend to look obsessively to Moscow. For obvious reasons, we can understand that, of course. But our deep sentiment in France is that our future in the 21st century is not eastward, is with the south of the Mediterranean and with Africa, and of course the problem of the Middle East. The continent of the second half of the 21st century will be Africa. Africa is sabotage. Africa is the youth of this world we live in. So it is of paramount importance for us Europeans to have and to invent a kind of relationship with the southern part and eastern part of the Mediterranean and the whole African continent. And of course, the Spaniards, the Italians, the Slovenes understand that, the Greeks understand that. But to have a partner, stable, well-managed, pro-European, with a long experience and particular interest in these problems, like Croatia, is very important for us.
What are the priorities of next multi-year budget plan? And what will be the situation with mobility grants and Erasmus project?
With
Erasmus project and mobility grants. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the priority will be all the investments for the future, research, innovation, renewable sources of energy, infrastructure, transportation of persons, of energy, telecommunication, and Erasmus, what we call Erasmus for all or lifelong learning. clearly. You may know that the whole Erasmus program was in danger or jeopardized late last year in autumn because we ran out of money. We needed what we call payment appropriations, and in several member states the whole program has to be stopped for the rest of the year. And it's thanks to the Parliament, and particularly our Budgets Committee, that we got the money we needed. We saved the Erasmus project, and we have managed to get enough money for this year 2013. We don't know what the amount allocated to Erasmus will be for the next 7 years, but there is a consensus among the member states and in Parliament to make a priority of Erasmus. So what is sure is that first, the program is saved. Second, the amount of money will be increased. And hopefully it will be a sizable increase, not 5%, 10%, but more. Even for the Brits, which are not the most generous of the bunch, the category, the heading, which Erasmus belongs to, in our jargon heading 1A, would increase by 30%. So it should be the order of magnitude of the increase in Erasmus. But for us, it is the top priority. Why? Because there is, of course, a stake in the quality of the training of our young leaders, particularly those who are present in this room. But also there is something else at stake. Because with Erasmus, we encourage young men and young ladies to travel, to meet other figures at an age when you are very combustible. So you meet people, you love them, you get married, you have children, and the more binational or trinational children Europe will have in 1 or 2 generations, the more integrated Europe will be. So I encourage you to travel and to get married abroad. There are plenty of very nice girls everywhere in Europe, and nice guys as well. It was the case, it's too late to recount, but it was the case with my daughter Hélène, the terrible Hélène. I have time to tell Hélène? to speak about her. And then it will be the end of the... Yeah, Hélène. You know the problem, the relationship between fathers and daughters. Everyone knows that. So she was very lazy. She decided to follow studies of literature. In France, when you don't want to work higher school, you choose literature. So she chose literature. in the prestigious Sorbonne University in Paris. Then she realized that she had to work a bit, too much. She was informed of the existence of Erasmus grants. So she applied for Erasmus grant in the hope to study in Sevilla, Bologna, Athena, and she found herself in St. Andrews, Scotland. What happens in St. Andrews, Scotland? Rain. It rains every day, all the year around. There is one single entertainment, golf. But she doesn't play golf. And Scotland is a highly civilized country in which golf is forbidden for women. So, what happened? She met a young Erasmus Spanish student, Diego. Diego was an ornithologist, a scientist specialized in birds. And he followed a small bird, which in winter lives in the southern part of Spain, Andalusia, and then migrate for summer in Scotland. The name of the bird, it's amusing in Spanish, I don't know the translation in Croatian, is El Mosquitero Musical. Well, they meet. What happened? Without my permission, 9 months later, was born a little Pablo. But where the history becomes interesting, so far it's a family history, we don't mind, but you will see. Now, the story becomes interesting because Pablo was born with two parents. We were not married to each other, though. So, two parents without legal ties between them. Parents belonging to two different countries, and he was born in a third country. So, who was empowered, who was entitled to declare Pablo's birth to the city hall of St. Andrews, to give Pablo's a Christian name and a surname, given that on the surname the French, the Spanish and the Scottish legislation are different. And of course, who was entitled to propose or to decide of Pablo's nationality? These three questions have had, and unfortunately still have, no answers at all. No answer at all. If you imagine that a few years later the three of them went to Rome, where a few months later was born a little Oscar. And then in a few years' time, maybe they will go to live in Prague, where Pablo, becoming student due to an Erasmus grant, will go to Bratislava and will meet a Danish girl with whom he will get a child, in Stockholm, and then they will settle in Berlin. What is the outcome of that? We start only now realizing that when, among the member states, we keep repeating to our audiences and our citizens, now Europe is a single market, but also a single space of life, area of common life. Travel, go abroad in a neighboring country to find a work, to study, of course, Erasmus, but to find a job, to marry, to have children, to make your life. But they believe us, and they do it, and they are surprised because they are kind of vanguard of the European Union, of the integrated Europe, of genuine European citizens, and they realize that there are still a lot of practicalities, of administrative problems which are not settled and which we have to settle. And when it comes to family law, to civil law, to penal law, to commercial, part of commercial law, or labor legislation, it still pertains to national competences. It's not a matter we can decide upon at EU level. So we have a lot to do, not only to adopt the best legislation at the EU level, but also to work together among national legislators, Mrs. and Mr. members of the Croatian Parliament, to ensure that all those, particularly those members of the younger generation who believe us, realize that due to our common efforts, life is better and easier in our common European space. It should be as easy for a Croatian to go and work and marry and settle in any other member state of the EU as it is in the United States of America for a Texan to go to and work and get married in California or Nebraska or Seattle, etc., etc. That is what is at stake. That's why Erasmus is crucial. Erasmus is crucial. It's our top priority. Thank you.
For having had us here in economics, and really for this excellent lecture to President Lamassoure. I think you have seen that he knows legal aspects, historic aspects, economic aspects, budgetary aspects, but also extremely entertaining aspects of Europe, going all the way to Pablo and Oscar, so you can see that the European members of Parliament are very amusing and creative. Thank you very much for this great opportunity.